Hi, it's Randy Horwitz from the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, and I want to give a brief introduction to the COVID vaccine trials just to refresh your memory. Most of us remember the different phases of trials, but this will just be a brief refresher. Currently, there are a few vaccines that are in phase 3 trials, so let's review what that means. If we look at the phases of a vaccine trial, we start with phase 1, which is really a safety phase. We take a few healthy adults, test the properties, how tolerable is it. We check baseline labs, some pharmacologic parameters. We just want to make sure this is relatively safe. Phase 2 is when we're looking for a specific outcome, in this case, maybe immunogenicity. So we use a larger number of subjects, more people. We get preliminary information about the desired effect and general safety. Safety and adverse effect data is being accumulated throughout every phase. But now we're also looking for how immunogenic this vaccine is. Are we getting a robust antibody or T-cell response? Finally, phase 3 is the pivotal study. This is real-world efficacy. So now we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of people. We're testing for efficacy and for safety, and the phase 3 trials are generally the basis for an FDA approval. They have to demonstrate, the manufacturers, that a vaccine is safe and effective for the purpose intended. Now with COVID, everything is upside down. We're in a big hurry, so we have Operation Warp Speed. And what Operation Warp Speed does is cut down what is normally about a 6-year process to perhaps a year. So we cut things down considerably. Let's take a quick peek at that. Here we see preclinical is the dark blue. Preclinical normally takes a few months, and in Warp Speed we are combining it with basically phase 1 trials. So we're doing them almost concurrently. And then phase 2 and phase 3 in the bottom bar, we can see are combined. That's phase 2 and 3. And at the same time, the brown top bar is manufacturing. So at the same time we're doing phase 2 and 3 trials, the drug companies are manufacturing the vaccine in large numbers. So we cut down a process that's normally about 44 months to about 6 months or so. Finally, we're left with manufacturing and distribution at the end of phase 3 trials, and that is condensed somewhat. Manufacturing continues, distribution begins, and our last step in here, which is marked by our red star, is applying for FDA approval. In this case, maybe emergency use approval. So that's what we have. An accelerated approval process and testing process. There are a few COVID vaccine considerations to take into mind. Let's divide them into 3 majors. First one is how to test vaccine efficacy. We have 2 options here. Once someone has received both doses or multiple doses of a vaccine if needed, we have to see whether they're going to get the disease or not. And to do this, we're going to do one of 2 processes. One is a challenge test. Challenge test is where you take individuals who are immunized and purposefully expose them to the virus. In this case, there's an ethical issue because there is no treatment or cure for this particular virus. So even though the UK is considering it, we're not really considering it in the US. Rather, we are depending upon real-world epidemiology. That is, we take a population that's immunized and compare them to an unimmunized population, have them go about their activities of daily living, and see how many people in each group come down with COVID. Tricky part is in the one of the trials now, the Pfizer phase 3, we're looking for symptoms. So we're not routinely testing people to see if they're asymptomatic carriers or develop an asymptomatic infection. You have to have symptoms because we're looking for only severe disease. Secondly, what good is a party if no one shows? What if no one takes the vaccine? A vaccine's only as good as the population you can immunize. 2 facets to this particular concern. One, there's a portion of the population that's fearful of vaccines in general. They're not necessarily anti-vaxxers, although they are included, but there are people who are just afraid in general. We need to get a good 50%, maybe 70% of the population immunized, either naturally or through a vaccination, for it to be effective. We can talk about herd immunity in a different talk. Secondly, some people are fearing warp speed approach, people who normally will get their vaccines routinely, but they're afraid that we're cutting corners or that the FDA is giving approval before we have adequate safety data. Certainly, we won't have long-term safety data on this vaccine when it comes to market. So those two fears have to be overcome in order to have an effective vaccination campaign. Finally, ethical issues. Who gets saved? Who gets the vaccine? It's the lifeboat issue. Who gets to hop in? Is it the people who are at greatest risk, which might be the elderly, greatest risk of mortality? Or is it the people who we need in the front lines, trained personnel who come into contact with the virus the most? Is it people who are immunocompromised for some reason? And again, if we have enough vaccine around, won't be an issue, but at least initially there's going to be concerns. At a global level, the question is what countries are going to get the vaccine? Is it only the countries who have the resources to pay the manufacturers first? I know the U.S. put in a big order. What about countries that can't afford this? So, 3 big considerations. We'll explore other issues of immunity and efficacy in future talks. Thank you.